Thank you for joining us for this edition of HIAS Ask Me Anything series, The Decline of U.S. Citizenship and Dismantling the American Dream. You can watch our previous Ask Me Anythings on HIAS Pennsylvania's YouTube page, on our website, at the link in the chat, and in the video section of HIAS Pennsylvania's Facebook page. My name is Cathryn Miller-Wilson, and I'm the Executive Director of HIAS Pennsylvania, a nonprofit whose mission is to provide immigration legal services to low-income immigrants and refugees in Pennsylvania. Before starting today's program, I want to alert you to some exciting upcoming events. On May 18th, there'll be a prayer vigil in front of ICE. Then in June is Immigrant Heritage Month, and the kickoff event will be a classical music benefit concert for us on June 1st at Bryn Mawr Presbyterian. More details about these events, as well as the additional Immigrant Heritage Month events, are available on our website. Links are in the chat. Okay, so turning to today's program. Since January 2025, all of us have watched with growing concern about the expansive wielding of presidential power that's been occurring, which seems to be supported by Congress, despite Congress's traditional role as a check on presidential power. These attacks are multiple and involve multiple spheres, from tariffs to war powers to attacks on industry and education. But nowhere is the impact greater than on immigrants and immigration, and the logical journey's end for immigrants becoming U.S. citizens. This is actually our second program regarding attacks on citizenship in less than a year. Our last one was on September 10th, 2025, and can be viewed at the link in the chat if you missed it the first time. While the threats discussed during that program were certainly alarming, now things have gotten positively awful. The federal government is refusing to allow those who exercise their First Amendment rights to naturalize, is targeting persons from certain countries, ethnicities, and political beliefs for denaturalization, arguably in violation of the 13th Amendment, and targeting elderly and disabled people for additional security vetting, arguably in violation of the 14th Amendment. The Nuremberg trials, among many other lessons, taught us of the importance of the rule of law, which was the first thing to collapse in Hitler's Germany. What is currently happening to American citizens and those who are eligible to become citizens is one of many examples where the rule of law in the United States is being significantly challenged. To help us better understand what is happening, we are inviting back Program Manager Lori Alexander. Once again, Lori is the perfect person to walk us through the changes, as she is HIAS Pennsylvania's longest-serving staff member and has been doing naturalization work in addition to other things for 47 years. She's a nationally recognized expert in naturalization. She speaks 5 languages and has helped thousands of low-income newcomers in Pennsylvania take that final step to integration. It's a privilege and an honor to host her. So Lori, let's start with the basics. And while we're talking, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll try to answer as many as we can, but might not get to all of them. Also, a quick reminder, if your question's about a personal situation and you're seeking legal help, please don't ask your question during this webinar because it's being recorded, but do call us at 215-832-0100 during our intake hours on Wednesdays and Thursdays. The details about our intake hours and phone number will be in the chat. So Lori, what are the benefits of becoming a U.S. citizen?
Okay, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. There are quite a number of benefits to becoming a citizen, namely being able to travel with a U.S. passport and have the protection of the U.S. government abroad if you have any problems, if you're a citizen. More job opportunities, jobs with the federal government, and also private companies that have contracts with the government require citizenship. You can petition for certain relatives when you become a citizen, serve on a jury. But most importantly, it gives you security. Generally, we'll talk a little more about this, you cannot be deported once you've become a citizen. So it gives a sense of stability and security to our clients.
Okay, great. Who's typically eligible to become a U.S. citizen?
Okay, the basic requirements are that you must be 18 years old at the time of filing or older, have your green card, that means being a lawful permanent resident for 5 years before filing. We're talking about all people who are legally in the United States with permanent residence. It's cut to 3 years, the residence requirement, if you're married to a U.S. citizen. There are other residence requirements concerning how long you're allowed to have traveled out of the country. You have to pass an English and civics test. You have to be a person of good moral character. There are a number of questions about that, and be willing to take the oath of allegiance to the United States.
All right. And I think you pretty much just talked about this, but talking about paperwork, what does the process of becoming a citizen normally look like? How long does
Sure.
it take?
Well, the process is, first filing the application. It's a 14-page application with a lot of security questions on it. Then you have your biometrics taken, your fingerprints, wait for an interview, and then get sworn in a oath ceremony a couple months after passing your interview, if you pass. How long does it take? That's the best question because I cannot give you any answer to that. Right now, interviews have been delayed tremendously. Since December, we've only had 4 people had interviews, which is really, really a small amount for us. Normally, it was taking 3 to 6 months to get an interview in Philadelphia. We had a pretty good office where they were much faster than some other cities. But now we have no idea how long it's going to take.
Okay. And I see a question in the chat. If you, sorry, it seems to have disappeared. Oh, do children adopted by U.S. citizens under age 18 have a process to become citizens while younger than 18?
There is a process for derivative citizens. There would be biological and adopted children of citizens meeting certain requirements before the age of 18. Having a green card, it said living with the person. We can give you more details on that if you'd like to check with us. But adopted children are included in that, not stepchildren.
Okay, thanks. All right, so getting back to the naturalization process, you talked about how long it takes, which is anyone's guess. So talk a little bit more about what's going on. Why is the timing changed under the current administration?
I mean, we believe it's purposely being done, delaying everything so that less people are becoming citizens. The delays are with scheduling interviews as well as oath ceremonies, which are after people pass. It's usually 1 to 2 months. We've had about a half a dozen since the fall. We've also had ceremonies canceled. And these are people who are ready to go, and they've decided to do extra vetting on everybody and stop the ceremonies and re-vet people. So everything is just totally slow. And more importantly, people who are from the travel ban countries that you've been reading about, their applications will not be finalized. They will have an interview. They'll know if they pass, but they cannot be scheduled in for an interview because all applications, green cards, citizenship, other things for people from those countries are halted right now. So it's not moving anywhere. Once they get approved for their citizenship, they're not going to finish the process until this halting has been removed.
Okay, and so I just want to kind of emphasize or highlight something you just said. So you said you've had a lot of oath ceremonies canceled and processing not happening because they're doing revetting. So these are applications that were filed a while ago, correct? Like in the fall or over the summer. Is that correct?
Well, we have not really had many interviews, as I said, for several months. We're still waiting on almost all the applications filed in October, which are quite a large number, and even from September. So the people who had ceremonies canceled, we haven't had that many, but we've heard anecdotally about others, would have applied way before then.
And in the past, so before the current era, would the people who you filed for in September and October be citizens in time to vote in the primary that's coming up next week?
It's possible because we were getting some interviews in even less than 3 months and then another month or so for an oath ceremony. So many of them would have. But there are others, was taking 6 months or possibly longer. But it's hard to say because everybody is not scheduled in the order that they filed. We don't know why, but often there are people who are really, really fast. Now nobody's fast.
So to be clear, right. So to be clear, in the past, some people would have become citizens in time to vote for the primary, and
Yes.
all of them, it sounds like, would have become citizens in time to vote for the election, the congressional election in November.
Yes,
Is
of
that
course.
correct? In the
Yes,
past?
sure.
Yeah. And now it seems like it's not really clear. I mean, definitely those people now are not eligible to vote in the primary.
Right.
And if this continues to drag out, they're not going to be eligible to vote in November either.
Yeah, we don't know how long it's going to take. I'm not even talking
Hmm.
about the travel ban people, just regular applications. In the
Hmm.
past, when just things were super busy at USCIS, people were waiting a year for interviews. So that's not
Hmm.
that uncommon in some cities who are super busy. But the way it's going, we don't know if it's going to take. It could take a year. It could take more. Nobody knows what's going to happen. It's changing every day. But the travel ban people, I mean, I can anticipate that they're going to be citizens by November. To me, it's highly unlikely, but never know.
Okay. Um, and then I want to talk a little bit about the security re-vetting that's been going
Mhm.
on. How much do you know about what that means when they say re-vetting?
Yeah, they just came out on April 27th with an announcement that everybody is going to have their biometrics run again, their fingerprints. They haven't said if they're going to have to come back to the fingerprint office to redo it or they can just rerun the ones they have, because I think a more detailed vetting is being done with the fingerprints. So it's another delay that's going to happen because people can't get an interview until they have their biometrics taken. So if they're going to have to run everybody, it's going to take more time. And if they're going to invite them in to be refingerprinted, which is a possibility, that's going to even extend it even more.
Wow. And of course, these are fingerprints that have already been done, and they haven't commented that, all the fingerprints were lost or that
No,
there's
no,
some
they
legitimate reason.
yeah. In until recently, many people who applied for citizenship didn't have to have them retaken. They were able to use the fingerprints that were on file from their green cards and just send those in to the FBI. Some people had them done so long ago that they made them come in and do a new set. But now they said all the people, whether they did them a new set in person or they had old ones on file, they're going to run them all over again.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay. All right. There's some more questions in the chat.
Mhm.
So a listener asks, I understand the civics and government test changed it and is now harder. Have you seen an increase in failure rates?
Well, the test just started in October. So we have not had anybody interviewed with the new test yet. That's why there are a large number of applications, people filing right before the test changed, and none of them have been scheduled for interviews yet. So we're going to talk a little later about how the test has changed, and it is definitely going to be harder for people.
Okay. And then another question in the chat, how vulnerable are people whose naturalization is on hold to being detained by ICE? So yeah.
I mean, if they're revetting everyone, they're going to try to find something they can come up with, that could make people removable. That's even, starting just filing an application. They're scrutinizing everything so carefully. So we're, really being careful of what we file. But, anyone can get removed if they find something against them in the past through their fingerprints or just from going through their records. So nobody's safe from that till you naturalize.
Okay. Um, Another question, is it possible to get a copy, like if just a member from the public, of the new test or of study materials? Is that
Yeah, but you can
available?
go to the USCIS website,
Mm-hmm.
us.gov, and there's a heading called Citizenship, and you drop down and you'll see study materials there. It's 128 questions there, and there are also some videos to practice the test with. There's a number of materials on the USCIS website.
Okay. This question from a listener, I've heard that another requirement is to list every date you've left or entered the country. If so, for how far back? And I just wanted to clarify, that's always been true, correct? That you have to
Yes,
list
yes.
dates? Okay.
One point you had a list I mean, I remember the days, every trip since becoming a permanent resident. And there are people who maybe are here 10, 15, 20 years. I have somebody here 40 years who never applied for citizenship. And in the past, they would have had to list every trip, which is kind of crazy to remember. Now it's only every trip in the last 5 years right before filing. And that's really an important question because any trips over 6 months, people are being readmitted into the country, and they can decide that they're not admissible for some reason, and they can get put into removal. So, it's really, really important that we examine the number of days of the trips. And it's hard for people to remember, but we've got to do everything we can to figure that out before filing.
So just to clarify that, so if you take a trip as a permanent resident, which you're legally allowed to do, but take a trip, outside of the United States, but the trip lasts more than 6 months, then it puts them at risk of being put in removal proceedings.
Every time they're coming back, if it's a 180-day absence or more, it's a new admission. They've got to meet all the grounds of inadmissibility before being let in. There are exceptions, of course, and we've always had that, where if you can prove you had a strong reason for being out so long. Maybe you got sick while you were abroad. Your relative got really sick. You were visiting. I had students traveling, studying abroad who couldn't get home in between semesters. If you can prove a good reason, as well as proving that you didn't abandon your domicile in the United States, your home here, and we have to document that. For example, show that you maintained a residence, that you still had bills here, bank accounts, paid taxes. So, the burden is on the applicant to prove that they did not abandon and that there was a strong reason for being out that long. We've generally been successful in the cases that we filed, because we check that out before we file, of course. And it's a discretionary matter. So usually people have been approved, but we're worried that this is going to be a reason for them to try to deny people and put them into removal.
Okay. All right, I want to talk about some other things that I've been hearing about neighborhood investigations, changes to good moral character criteria. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that means?
There's a number of things that immigration has been using to try to make the process more difficult. I'll just quickly mention about the good moral character. As part of the process, you have to show, you have to be a person of good moral character for the past 5 years. So they're looking at a lot of things, looking at criminal things, or have you paid your taxes? Do you owe any money to the government? Child support, a lot of different things to see if you're a person of good moral character. And up until this administration, if everything was negative, the assumption was that you were a person of good moral character. Now they have announced, thank goodness it hasn't started happening yet, but that you're going to have to prove your positive factors of good moral character, besides not the absence of negative. For example, prove that you are active in your community or your church, or that you are a volunteer somewhere, that you have affidavits from witnesses who can swear to your good character. It's a lot of extra work, and it's not going to be very easy for some people to gather these documents. So far, they've announced that they will be doing it. It has not happened anywhere across the country yet. So we are not spending the time gathering all that in advance, because it'll just delay our work helping more people. But that is definitely a possibility for the future. So that's a big change. Never had anything like that. And the one that's the most frightening for us are these neighborhood checks that you mentioned. USCIS said they will be doing neighborhood checks unannounced. That means to applicants for naturalization, they can show up at their doorstep, investigators at any hour. This is not ICE. These are USCIS investigators. So they're not looking to detain them. But they're coming out. We've heard of 2 cases only in Philadelphia so far, but one, I believe they came out 7:30 in the morning one day, and I think another one on a weekend. And so, we're not going to be available necessarily if somebody comes and the client that wants to call us. So what we, they're trying to find fraud in their applications, find something wrong with it. They're especially concentrating on people who have applied for a medical waiver of the English language and civics requirements of this testing process. So basically, a medical waiver means that you have a physical, mental, or developmental disability that makes it impossible for you to be able to learn the 128 questions and to read and write in English. And we work with a lot of elderly and disabled people, and so we handle a lot of medical waiver cases. Unfortunately, there are people who try to use that as a crutch and not study for the test and say that get a doctor to fill out a form for them. So there has been fraud in the program. So they said they're going to be using greater scrutiny on the medical waiver cases, but these are the ones that they're definitely concentrating on visiting if they are going to do visits, and also whether people are getting public benefits fraudulently. Have they lied to the county assistant's office to get benefits that they're entitled to? So they're also can examine other aspects of their application. So these are really important things. We do not want our clients to talk to the investigators without us. And people are often, they feel intimidated. How can I, say no? They want to come in, ask me questions. They're afraid that, they're going to get in trouble for not letting them in. We are explaining that without a warrant, they are not required to let them in their house. We're explaining everything to the clients. We've created a card, a Know Your Rights card for naturalization applicants, telling people what to do if someone comes to the house. Very briefly, things like do not answer questions without us. Do not let them in your house. And the last item on that front of the card says, show the officer the back of this card. And the back of the card says, I am being represented by so-and-so, phone number such and such. Please call them if you want to talk to me. We do not want them answering anything without us. So we are giving a card like that to every client that we file for. And if, to other agencies who would want to use it, we're glad to share the card. It doesn't have our agency name on it. You just fill in the legal representative's name on the back with the phone numbers for people to have to show to the officer. And right now we have it in English and Spanish on the front of the card. We're thinking of doing translations into other languages. But the main thing is they can show the back of the card to the officer to contact us. But it's very frightening. I had an investigator come out, not for naturalization, but for a marriage case. And when I was speaking to him, he seemed pretty friendly. Just willing to talk to me. We were on the phone for like an hour. So I said, look, well, I have you on the phone. Are you doing naturalization investigations too? And he said, yes. And I said, we've only seen a couple in Philadelphia. I don't know if they were people just picked randomly or if it's going to be ongoing. He said ongoing until further notice. So we are expecting that to start happening at a higher level eventually, meaning, we've got to be aware of how we can help these people once they get an officer at their door. So they can either call us on the spot or officer, I asked him, what if we're not available when you call us? And he said, we will then tell the person, give them a couple of dates from our calendars when we're free, that they can come in with you to our office to answer questions there with the representative. So that part at least, but it shouldn't be happening. It's ridiculous. There's nothing reason to investigate most of these people.
Yeah. So I appreciate that because somebody asked in the chat, are they respecting the cards? And it looks like they will, in the sense that they'll schedule an appointment in the office.
Yeah,
right?
of course, it'll depend on the person and how intimidating they are and all of that. Our clients are very nice, and that's why we did this, because we could see they're knocking at the door and they're going to invite them in for a cup of coffee to talk. We just I could see that happening. They're afraid to be disrespectful to a government person, and they'd have to cooperate. So we are, telling them and sending them a letter with a card, telling them about how to behave, because it's so vital.
Yeah. So I want to just circle back to one thing that you had said earlier about these, what sparked the investigations. Sorry, I just forgot what I was going to say. Oh yes, you mentioned that there was some fraud in terms of people, claiming that they were disabled and getting the doctor to fill out the form. Do you know whether there have been documented cases of fraud, and if so, how many, or is this
I
just
don't
an
know numbers.
allegation?
Yeah, I don't know numbers, but I remember in the past there have been some doctors who they have gone after, who are being paid just to write up these medical waiver forms. So there is definitely some fraud, but I don't know to what degree. But this is something usually discussed at their interview we're there with them at their interview, they might ask them, like, when's the last time you saw this doctor, or who's your doctor you go with. They can ask plenty of questions at the interview time, not showing up unannounced to their home without their legal representative. That's the big
Okay.
change.
So it seems like even though we don't have the data to hand, this is just another
Witch hunt.
example of this administration just kind of taking, a small point and blowing it up and claiming that everybody is committing fraud. And so
Right.
we have to do these, right?
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Okay.
Just another way for them to go after people.
Right, right, right. Um, Okay, so now I want to go back to the changes in the citizenship test.
Hmm. Hmm.
Are you able to talk a little bit about how it's changed and what
Yeah,
kind of
sure.
questions? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the prior test were 100 questions about American history and government. There were easy questions, like who's the president now, and some harder ones, like what year was the Constitution signed, things people don't know off the top of their heads. But, they get a study booklet. The questions were asked from that test booklet. They were being asked 10 questions that were chosen randomly by the computer, some easier, some harder, and they had to get 6 right out of the 10. So if you study and there's no surprises there, it shouldn't be that hard to pass. But now they're trying to make it harder. They increased it to 128 questions to learn instead of 100. And you're going to be asked 20 questions instead of 10, and you have to get 12 right. So right there, it's harder. But also the questions in the new test are more complex, and there are a lot of open-ended questions there. And there's some of them are more difficult. Like they say, what is James Madison known for? And you ask the average person on the street, they're not going to be able to ask, or what is Alexander Hamilton known for besides having a Broadway play? I mean, it's things that people really can't answer that easily. And for people where English isn't their first language, to learn all that extra information is difficult. And it also removed some of the easier questions. There were a number of geographical questions before, like what is the longest river in the United States? What ocean borders on the West Coast and which one on the East Coast? They're a little bit easier, and people were able to learn those more easily than the complex things. And those have been removed from the test. So all around, it's going to be harder. And we're anxious to see. Somebody asked how people are doing. So I say you need to be a Jeopardy champion to answer. It's
Right,
very true. It's very true. If
right.
Dora and I sat down with the questions, I would think most of us would not know a lot of them. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's tough. And the question about, I see high school students studying for this. I mean, don't forget they're studying in their native language. So if you're
right.
talking, and often there are older people. So it's hard. There are some exceptions to the language requirement for older people. After a certain age and having your green card a certain number of years, you can use an interpreter for everything. But that's limited to the shortest time for your residence would be 15 years. So it's not available to most people and the right age. But the civics test, they're only easier one to take is if you don't have a medical waiver. Medical waivers excuse you from that. If you're age 65 or older and have your green card for 20 years, it's a long time, there are only 20 questions that you have to learn for the civics test. That stays in place even with the new change in the 128. But everybody else has the 128.
Wow. And just to further clarify, I mean, some of these questions, like what is Alexander Hamilton known for? He's actually known for several things.
Well,
So
there
that would
in the
make,
study book that they give you maybe 4 or 5 options for some of the questions. So you only have
and
to
so
learn,
any of those
yeah,
options
you only
are
have to
correct.
learn one of them. Or they ask about a Native American, name one Native American tribe, and they give a list, like 20. You only pick one that you want to answer. You don't have to learn every single option, what
Mhm.
somebody did, or just you can answer one of them, whichever is
Got it.
easiest to remember.
Right, right. Um, so switching gears a moment, what have you seen, or have you seen any changes in applicants for citizenship in recent months?
Definitely, definitely. It's been the last number of months. The number of people calling us to apply has dropped. Um, And when we talk to people about why they're not applying, it's fear. Fear is the number one answer, that they're afraid that something can happen at the interview. They don't want to have any contact with USCIS because they do go back and look at all their paperwork from the time they came to the country. And they want to pick on something and try to, get them in trouble. That's the time if you go to an interview. If you don't apply, nobody's going to look at your stuff. So fear is the main reason. And then there's some others, though, that go the opposite way, who are calling us, who are really anxious to become citizens because they know they'll have the protection of citizenship and not have to worry about anything happening. But more often, we're seeing that people are afraid to apply. And, we do workshops at other organizations, and they've reported also that they are getting less people coming forward because they're afraid. Because it could end up in deportation if they, want to find something wrong and they can push it. So it's a frightening thing.
So the next question, it's kind of dovetails on the answer that you just gave. So, traditionally we've thought, okay, well, at least if you naturalize, you're safe.
Mm-hmm.
What has changed with that?
Oh, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of change. I mean, we've all seen American citizens who've been detained on the news, people, even killed. And there are other ways that the government is going after American citizens. So one of the ones that's a priority, they've said it's a priority now for the administration, is denaturalization, taking people's citizenship away who were naturalized. It's a very lengthy, complicated procedure, rarely has been used in the past. For example, from January 2025 until April of this year, just the last few months, there were 22 cases filed with 15 people being denaturalized. It might not sound like a lot of people, but if you look at the statistics from 1990 to 2017, an average of 11 cases per year were filed. I don't know if they were all that denaturalized, but 11 were filed in all that long period, most often for war criminals, Nazi persecutors. It was very rare to go after anyone. So now they're looking to try to get people who they say got their citizenship through some kind of fraud, that they lied about something at their interview or on their application. I mean, it would have to be extremely, extremely serious for it to be a grounds for denaturalization. But the fact that they've already, in a few months, went after 22 people, when, before a period of 17 years or so, had only 11 a month. I mean, that's an enormous change right there. So it's very frightening. Yeah, and another
11 a year, right? Or
11 a year from 1990 to 2017, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And the other, there are two other major things they're doing that affect American citizens. They're trying to end, as I'm sure you've heard in the news, birthright citizenship. People, the Constitution in the 14th Amendment says if you were born in the jurisdiction of the United States, you are a citizen at birth, regardless of who your parents are. It's nothing to do with your parents. You were born in the jurisdiction of the United States. So now they're trying to end birthright citizenship, saying if they don't have citizen parents or permanent resident parents, they should not be American citizens. This can only be done with a change to the Constitution. It can't be done by executive order. So this is been taken to court, obviously, and there's a preliminary injunction stopping this from taking place. But there's no final decision yet. There's just so much to it that's not even mentioned in there. There are people here legally as temporary workers, students, tourists who give birth in the United States. And under what he's trying to do, their children would not be citizens. They wouldn't have any status. Parents are here legally as temporary workers. And what are the children if they're born here? So it affects so many different groups. As I said, it's in court. They say it's supposed to be prospective going forward if it happens, but it could be retroactive. And that would just be chaotic what would happen to all these people who were citizens and suddenly say they're not. I mean, I can't even imagine that, anything like that. But unfortunately, we don't know when that what's going to happen. They did have oral arguments about this with the Supreme Court, on April 1st. I think, Cathy, you listened to it. I didn't have a chance to
I
listen.
did.
And they're supposed to be making a final decision in late June or early July. So it's not far off. But it's a unheard of thing. And the president does not have the power to make that change without changing the Constitution. So that's the second major thing affecting citizens. And the third one that's important is that he wants to try to abolish dual citizenship. Now, the United States recognizes that people might have citizenship from another country, but if you're becoming a citizen, they're asking for an oath of loyalty to the United States. Their primary loyalty will be to the United States. Some countries themselves do not allow dual citizenship. So if you're from one of those countries and you take on American citizenship, you would lose your original one. So there are people who decide maybe not to apply that way, but many, many countries allow you to have both. And legislation was introduced into the Senate this past December. It was called the Exclusive Citizenship Act, which would make people renounce their dual citizenship within 1 year, or the American citizenship would be taken away. So this would affect millions and millions of people, and it's the constitutionality of this is also in question because it contradicts U.S. law and Supreme Court precedents about this that allow for dual nationality. When people ask me, can I have dual citizenship? I say, you better check with your country you're from first, call your embassy and double check. But the U.S. allows it. They don't encourage it, but it is allowed. So that's the third major change affecting citizens. So it's not just affecting, all this stuff going on affecting immigrants who are here. It's without citizens, lots of citizens can be affected by these horrible things.
Well, so a listener says, I was shocked the Supreme Court even decided to hear the birthright citizenship case, and any idea why they might have agreed to. And I don't know if you know this,
Right?
Lori, because
You can
we
take that one,
obviously aren't
Cathy.
doing Supreme Court litigation. But my understanding, they decide to hear cases that where there's a conflict amongst the circuits, or where it's of what's the word? Significant importance to the United States. And so I think they decided to hear it because it's significantly important, both in terms of executive power, because as Lori was saying, it's really, you have to do it by constitutional amendment, not by executive order. And of course, because of the consequences of a change that large. So that's likely why they took it. So another question in the chat, I saw that denaturalization cases are now being filed by quote unquote rank and file Justice Department lawyers rather than a special unit like in the past. Have there been any filings in the Eastern District of PA? So I am not aware whether there have been any filings in the Eastern District. I don't know, Lori, if you are.
No, I don't know either, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think we will be seeing them because what the executive has announced and DOJ, they've announced that they're filing 384 cases, which if you remember the statistics that Lori cited, that's an outrageous number. And that further, they're planning on filing many, many more because there's so much fraud. And so many problems. So I assume that we will be seeing them. I also assume that it may happen to some of our clients, and if so, we will obviously figure out what we're doing with that. We'll probably pull in pro bono assistance to defend the clients against the denaturalization process. But I think that one of the things both about this particular situation, the denaturalization petitions, and literally everything that's happened with regard to immigrants, the federal government is taking steps, but they're doing so while in the process of spreading lies. It almost doesn't matter how many denaturalization cases are being filed. What the damage has already been done by them publicly and repeatedly stating that there are all these citizens who don't deserve to be citizens. And so what that happens is it creates a kind of almost like a jury of Americans who start suspecting fellow newly naturalized citizens because the
Not
federal
only
government is
new, not
claiming all
only
kinds of
newly lat,
fraud.
Carol, Cathy, not only newly naturalized, they can go back and go after anybody they want.
Right, they could go after anybody. But my point being that they've created this kind of guilty until proven innocent situation by repeatedly lying that there's all this fraud, and so that's why we're
Right,
filing, you
right.
know. So so it's a really, really dangerous situation, not just upsetting for the targeted person, but a really dangerous climate for US citizens everywhere. Um, Okay, then there's another question. Um, the I think it's related to destroying dual citizenship.
Hmm.
A listener says, wouldn't that technically affect most of the population of the country because most of us are related to people at some point in our family tree that were born? Um, but you know, I mean, I guess let me ask for clarification. Jennifer, if you want to unmute and clarify your question. Are you talking about dual citizens or are you talking about denaturalization of current citizens? Birthright. Okay. Yes, that would affect most the population of most of the country. Yes, indeed. Because where, most of the country is immigrants, whether it's current immigrants or generations back. If it's generations back, that means somewhere in your family tree, someone became a citizen because they were born here. Um, so, you
Their
know,
parents might have never been citizens or permanent
uh,
residents. So there's many people who would fall under that.
yeah, yeah. So that's right. It would affect many, many people. Okay. So let's get back to voting. And I know that with the delays that you described, um, we've pretty much given up hope on the petitions that we filed in September and October. But let me just ask you, if a miracle were to happen, today is May 12th. Um, let's say that someone got their oath ceremony for May 15th. Can they vote on May 19th?
Definitely not. I mean, normally you have to register to vote when you become a citizen, and then when you can vote depends on the residency requirements of the states where the state you're from. So some states require you have to be living in that state for 30 days or 90 days or 15 days because they don't want people running to another state to vote where they think their vote would be more heard. So there's a residency requirement, but I learned of something which I've never known and it was shocking to me. Pennsylvania is the only state in the country that requires that people be naturalized as citizens for at least 30 days before voting in an election. So you could have been living in Pennsylvania all your life, became a citizen, and the election's coming up in a couple of weeks. You cannot vote. You have to be a citizen for 30 days. We're the only state that has this. This is an archaic law from the Pennsylvania State Constitution. It's still in there, going back to 1874. It's crazy, and I was never aware of this, but this is the law. And we've been working with a voting rights organization in Washington who is working on a lawsuit to challenge this, to trying to find plaintiffs who would fit under this category who were not allowed to vote in an election because they weren't citizens for 30 days. So it was a shocking thing to learn. So they call it the durational citizenship requirement, but in Pennsylvania, it's both residents 30 days and being a citizen 30 days. We're the only one.
So, back to a question, somebody wrote a question in the Q&A. Is there a process for undocumented immigrants to ever become citizens, or was there before the current federal government. And I guess that's a kind of larger question than the questioner realizes, which is fine. Immigration is complicated. So I'll kind of take this one. If you're undocumented, the first thing, if you're interested in becoming a citizen eventually, is you need to consult with a lawyer to see if you are eligible for any status that would lead to citizenship. And if you are, then that process can be started. If you're not, then you may be eligible for statuses that don't lead to citizenship. For example, temporary protected status that allows you to be legally here and to work, but it's not a pathway to citizenship. So if you choose to, you can start that process. But again, it won't lead to citizenship. And then the other thing is whether you are undocumented and eligible for something or undocumented and not eligible, it is possible that you may become eligible because of changes either in your circumstances or changes in the law. So if you feel like something has changed and I want to talk to a lawyer again, then that's something you can certainly do. And if the change means that you're eligible, then that process can be started. And if it doesn't, then of course you're back in the same boat.
Yeah, we
So,
hear questions like this a lot with people
mhm.
not knowing the process that you have to have a green card for 5 years before you can apply for citizenship. So what Cathy described is the process up to getting a green card. If somehow you can get that, then just a matter of 5 years later you can apply for citizenship. But that's the hard part, getting the permanent status.
Right. And just to be clear, because and this is a little bit off topic, but I think it's important enough to stress. One of the problems, people even generous-hearted people are concerned about why would you be undocumented? You should just follow our laws. So that's the problem. Our laws don't give you a lot of pathways. And I'll just give you an example. To apply for asylum, you have to prove that the government persecuted you for one of five reasons. But most Haitians, we know that Haitians are very much in distress because there's been two earthquakes and their president has been assassinated. But most Haitians are not eligible for asylum because there's no government. So they can't prove that the government has persecuted them because there is no government. So, so unless they're eligible for like a family-based petition or something else, they're not going to be able to get permanent residence. So another example is people who are labeled economic migrants, when really what they're suffering for is starvation because of climate change. But there's no legal process for establishing an immigration benefit because you're starving and have no way to live because the water dried up in your village. So, so that's why, being undocumented, it's not because people run around and want to flout our laws. It's because they're desperate and our laws don't provide sufficient remedies. So,
And if I could just add, we mentioned
yeah,
family-based petitions where citizens and certain permanent residents can file to bring close relatives here or to get them legal status. But the system is so broken that if you file for a brother or sister, you're an American citizen, the waiting time for that kind of visa is 15 years. And so, I mean, it's really not a realistic system for people to use. An unmarried son or daughter over 21 is about an 8 year wait. I mean, everything, there's just a few categories that are faster. And on top of that, now 75 countries, they're not issuing any immigrant visas for family based right now. All immigrant visas are stopped. So to try to go the legal route to bring them, there's not a lot of options.
right. So the reality is migration has been a human activity since the beginning of mankind for all kinds of reasons. And so the more exclusionary an immigration act is, the more you're going to invite people to sneak in and not obey the act because you're not responding to human needs. It would make a lot more sense to have an immigration law that provided a whole variety of remedies and a security vetting process. so that we could have controlled immigration instead of what we have now. So, um, okay. Another question in the chat, do we know what additional activities are being done as part of the additional vetting? What problems is the additional vetting solving? So some of this we talked about already. That's the fingerprinting. We also talked about, right, the questioning of neighbors. Anything else, Lori, that
Well, for people who have been granted refugee status since
mhm.
Biden, they want to go back and re-examine their refugee applications and asylum applications to see if there's anything that was, problematic. Go back and try to take away the status there. So, they're going to possibly be re-interviewing a lot of people. Cathy, I think we only have 5 minutes left. So, if you want to
Oh,
wrap
okay.
up, okay.
Yes, yes, thank you. I was getting so
I
involved
know we
by
could
this
talk a long
fascinating
time on this
discussion
subject. Yeah.
that I lost track of time, right? So, so I do want to end on a kind of positive note. What can attendees do to help immigrants facing these and other challenges?
Okay. I mean, the first thing is to get legal advice from qualified professionals, not from the neighborhood community group who's trying to help people or rip them off often, but people who know the laws. It will help protect them from putting themselves at risk by filing for citizenship, which, as I said, if there's something they catch on there, they can put them into removal proceedings. So get the qualified help. Um, Attendees can volunteer to help people prepare for the civics test. We've had volunteers working one-on-one with by phone or in person with applicants to study the civics questions, which would be a great thing to do. Also, I think we talk about the Pennsylvania archaic law about having to be a citizen 30 days. You can talk to your representatives at the state level about that requirement. So, because a constitutional amendment would need to be done to the Pennsylvania Constitution to do that, and so our legislators for the state could get involved in that. And if you're interested in working on this voting issue for Pennsylvania, you can contact Cathy or me, and we can put you in touch with the voting rights group who is actively pursuing a lawsuit on this. But if encourage people to get the legal help from somebody who knows what they're doing. Any doubts, they should not be doing it themselves.
Okay, great. And we'll put in the chat the information about volunteering with the civics and also about contacting our intake if you want to get legal advice or legal
And I did
information
look
about the
quickly. I know
process.
somebody asked a question a couple of times about people with U visas being eligible for citizenship. They have to get their green cards first, and the same way, wait 5 years after getting their green cards to apply for citizenship. They can't skip that step.
Okay, great. All right. So thank you again, Lori, for your critical work and for sharing your insights and facts about the
Wish
naturalization
we had more
process.
time. There's so much more we could talk
Right.
about.
Right. Wish we had more time. I emphasize the word facts because there's so much misinformation. I hope if there is any fact, even one that you take away from this presentation, that you spread it amongst your family, friends, and colleagues. Because the more we share facts, the more we can counter the lies. So we've run out of time, but if you have additional questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, please feel free to email them to me. My email address will go in the chat. I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks, so I'm not going to get back to them right away. But I am certainly happy to reconnect with you to answer your questions after the program and after I get back from vacation. A recording of this program will be posted on our website and Facebook page, and we urge you to share the recording with those who couldn't attend this program. Thanks very much, and it was a great pleasure.